Should have rode the elevator. Yeah, ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Georgia State Capitol, the People's House. My name is Gloria Butler, Senate Democratic Minority Leader. I have served in this chamber for over 25 years, and I'm proud of the work we've done under the Gold Dome. Here is where I learned to really get things done. You have to work across the aisle and build bridges of understanding and mutual respect. But Donald Trump is making this impossible. He is building a new Republican Party built on extremism and hatred that has no interest in actually delivering for the American people. We are gathered in the great state of Georgia today because there are some brave individuals who still believe in the power of bipartisanship and the importance of defending our democracy. And we're coming together to lay out the stakes of this election for Georgians and Americans everywhere. The choice is clear. Joe Biden is fighting for our freedom and democracy, and Donald Trump is running a campaign of revenge and retribution in service of himself. As I stated, the choice is clear. Now, it's my honor to turn things over to Congressman Adam Kinzinger.
Thank you, Leader. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I actually recognize this staircase as I'm standing out here from some of the press conferences after the election. And it's kind of humbling to be like, oh, yeah, there were some very big things that happened at that moment right here in a really important state. So if you'd have told me, Adam Kinzinger of 3 years ago, that you're going to be endorsing a Democrat for president in 3 years, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I would have been like, what? This has got to be a different Adam Kinzinger. It can't be me. But I got to tell you, the stakes of this moment are way too high. As you all know, I officially endorsed President Biden today, and it's very simple why. So if I look at two things, number one, who's going to fight for people and who's going to fight for himself? I think there is nobody that believes that Donald Trump is more of a person committed to this country and to doing things for others than Joe Biden is. Joe Biden has made it clear that even when we disagree, and there are things that I disagree with the president on, he's going to put the interest of the country and the interest of the people of the country above his own interests. What does Donald Trump do? Well, Donald Trump, at the beginning of every one of his rallies, has the January 6th people that have been detained sing the national anthem. He calls them the January 6th hostages. And by the way, he only started using that term after October 7th, when the term hostages were being used in another capacity. But I look at this and say, why is it that, what is so important about this election, even beyond who's fighting for themselves and who's fighting for the country? And the reality is because there is a fight for democracy that if we don't buckle down and take seriously, we could easily lose that fight for democracy. The former president convinced a significant amount of the American people that an election was stolen. And in a self-governing society, in my time in Congress, I spent a lot of time traveling around to countries that were failing or countries that had struggling democracies. And one of the things that was in common is if you believe that your vote doesn't count or your voice hasn't been heard, democracies fail, because that's your voice in a democracy. Every 2 years you get a chance to have your voice heard. The former president convinced a significant amount of the American people that the system was rigged, that he won. And what did we see as a result of that? We saw a mob launched by the former president on the Capitol of the United States. I didn't watch that on TV. I lived it. Harry lived it. We were there when a mob of angry people that believed from the former president that their voice wasn't heard made a decision to attack the Capitol. Now, it would be one thing if in the past, if after that, the Republican Party and the former president would have taken accountability for what happened. If he'd have said, this got out of control, this never should have been that. But what do we have instead? From the Republicans, we have denial, we have conspiracies, we have lies, and we have scoffing. I watched a former colleague of mine just about an hour or two ago on television kind of chuckle when he was asked about the question of democracy. And does democracy matter? He goes, people aren't going to vote on the issue of democracy. Somebody has to. Somebody has to defend it. Somebody has to stand strong. And I've got to tell you, in November, there is one man running for re-election, of two men running for re-election, that cares about the future of this country and cares about democracy, and that's Joe Biden. And if we have things we disagree on, that's fine. We have things in this country we're going to disagree on for the next 100 years that we may not even be able to solve. But if we don't have our democracy, we won't have the luxury to disagree on those things. I've got a 2.5-year-old son that deserves to be raised in a strong country like I got to be raised in. That generation has every right to have their voice heard, to have a strong democracy, to be in a country they can be proud of and not have a leader intent on dividing and destroying the American people to turn them against each other for his own selfish gain. And guess what? His kids have a right to that too. And my kids' grandkids have a right to that. And only if we stand strong today and talk about the importance of defending our democracy, and sometimes that means taking somebody and endorsing them that you didn't think you'd endorse 3 years ago. But I tell you what, I am proud to stand up here today as a conservative Republican and endorse Joe Biden for re-election to President of the United States. And I'm also honored to stand up here with the leader. I'm honored to stand up here with Harry Dunn. And I'm honored to stand up here with your former Lieutenant Governor, a great friend of mine, and also a very strong conservative who knows the stakes here, Geoff Duncan. Geoff.
It's great to be back in the People's House. There are so many great memories I have in this building. I served nearly 10 years in a couple of different capacities. And I couldn't help but think when I walked in the door, the time that I spent in the House, walked in 2013, representing an 80-20 district in Forsyth County. That's 80% Republican district in Forsyth County, and learning the process of how to pass a bill, working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take on organized crime, to help rural hospitals. Then I think about the time that I decided to run for lieutenant governor. And many people in this state said I was too conservative to actually be a statewide elected official. But by the grace of God, we won that election, and we worked for 4 tough years. We worked across the aisle, worked with Leader Butler and others to bring meaningful legislation forward. We passed over 50 bipartisan health care bills. We took on COVID reform, and we passed a very important hate crimes piece of legislation. There's also some tough memories in this building I've got. We were second guessed on COVID almost every minute of every day from the White House, specifically Donald Trump. Lies, conspiracy theories around the 2020 election, so much so that I had to have armed guards around my office and my home, around my family, just to fight off the fact I didn't admit that the election was rigged, because it wasn't. Fake electors sat just a few feet from us, sat in a room and tried to usurp democracy. And then the unfortunate events of January 6th showed up, and sitting in this building watching those events play out were a huge part of why I'm standing here today. All of those tough memories seem to track back to one person and one person only, and that's Donald Trump. Going against the grain as a Republican and supporting Democrat Joe Biden for president is not easy. But I'm not looking at this election through the lens of being a Republican. I'm looking through the lens of being an American that cares more about the future of my country than the moral bankrupt nominee of my party. There are political ramifications to this decision, but they pale in comparison to 4 more years of Donald Trump, both home and abroad. Let me speak directly to the millions of Republicans across the country who are tired of making excuses for Donald Trump's behavior at their churches, in their offices, and at their own kitchen tables. Enough is enough. The nightmare has to end, and it has to end now. It's time for us to purge Donald Trump from our system. Let's take the next 4 years as Republicans and build and heal a new party a GOP 2.0, a party that finds leaders that are willing to embrace conservative principles and work across the aisle, leaders that understand the value of civility and compromise, that once again value honesty and integrity, a party that uses policy, empathy, and tone to work across that aisle, to gain majorities, to talk about issues, use it as our North Star. The last 4 years have been difficult for our family, the journey, but a journey that's been worth traveling. There have been so many folks over the last 4 years, nearly 4 years, Republicans specifically, that have come up and offered words of encouragement, that have quietly sent notes, have praised the notion of saying and doing the right thing. It's my time to ask a favor of all those thousands and thousands of Republicans across the country who've given us words of encouragement. I have an ask. My ask is this: it is your time to do the right thing. Don't give Donald Trump 4 more years to continue to destroy this country. It's a great honor of mine to introduce to you former U.S. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn. Talking about January 6th is such a sobering event on so many fronts. It gave us, as Americans, a peek into the soul of MAGA, to watching those events play out. It also served as another historical example of where hate-filled movements can take that very movement. It's also a reminder of how delicate democracy is every single day that we wake up. If it were not for a few heroic and brave police officers at the Capitol, our nation's democracy would look different today. So thank you for your service, and welcome to Georgia.
Good afternoon. To the organizers, I must first say thank you for having this inside. I think we all can appreciate that. I'm really happy to be here today, but honestly, I wish that I wasn't. I wish that I was in Washington, D.C. at the United States Capitol, fulfilling my 17th year at the United States Capitol. But no, I'm not. I'm here in Georgia, been all around the country, trying to stop a wannabe dictator. Not my words, not MSNBC or CNN's words, his words. He'll be a dictator on day one. Donald Trump is the greatest threat to our democracy and the safety of communities across the country today. Y'all in Georgia were at the epicenter of his dangerous and extreme attempt to overturn the results of a fair and free election. Trump has spent years attacking former Lieutenant Governor Duncan and even tried to get your Secretary of State to illegally find votes after Trump lost the state. After leaving the White House, Trump has encouraged and continues to encourage political violence. On January 6th, we all remember where we were. You know what you saw. However, you have people led by Donald Trump tell you what you saw didn't happen. What we went through didn't exist. It was a tour. Let me tell you something. It wasn't a tour. Police officers gave everything they had that day. The men and women of the United States Capitol Police, the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department. I'm honored to be standing here right now, but anytime I get the opportunity to give them the credit that they deserve, I give them that credit. My fellow officers and I experienced that type of violence at the hands of a mob of MAGA extremists on January 6th. Representative Kinzinger talked about it. These individuals were there. There were enough people there that day who believed the election was stolen. They told us while they were beating us with police, with thin blue line flags, with don't tread on me flags, with American flags, they were beating police with them, saying the election was stolen. Donald Trump sent us here. That's why I feel confident saying that Donald Trump is solely responsible for the events of January 6th. Because as those rioters were beating us, they told us the reason they were there is because of Donald Trump. His deranged, self-centered, obsessive quest for power is the reason violent insurrectionists assaulted me and my brave colleagues. Officer Brian Sicknick, January 7th, succumbed. Officer Sicknick's father, Charles, said it best. Trump is the reason my son is dead. Trump does whatever will get him votes and helps only Donald Trump. Trump has shown us who he is every day for years. He calls the people who attacked our Capitol patriots. He calls the men and women who died serving and protecting this country suckers and losers. He constantly echoes the words of dictators and invokes the language of Nazi Germany, embracing political violence, pledging, like I said, to rule as a dictator on day one, and warning of a bloodbath if he loses. Now, people have said he didn't mean it like that, or, well, that's just bluster or locker room talk. He has told us over and over again what he says, and it's up to us. We only have ourselves to blame if we allow him back in the White House again. He doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Oh, he meant this. He tells us what he means. The stakes of this election are too high. Even lifelong Republicans are putting aside their party and supporting President Biden. I'm so proud to be here alongside Congressman Kinzinger, who also saw the effect of Donald Trump's encouragement of political violence. I'm really happy to be here with you, man. It means a lot to me. Congressman Kinzinger was on the January 6th committee and heard from hundreds of us who were there when Donald Trump inspired a violent mob to attack the Capitol. Unlike Trump, Adams' loyalty doesn't lie with a political party. It's to the nation he swore an oath to protect, and that's why he's here today. He knows how important this election is, and there's nothing more crucial than defeating Donald Trump. This election is a choice between Joe Biden, who will preserve our democracy, our Constitution, our freedoms, and Donald Trump, who is a fundamental threat to our democracy and our country. Americans need to wake up. This is not a drill. Donald Trump is the single greatest threat to the United States of America in a generation. We're sitting here waiting for the Supreme Court to render decisions about immunity. These institutions that I totally believe are worth protecting, are worth fighting for. These institutions aren't going to save us from Donald Trump. It's going to take the American people to once and for all reject Donald Trump at the ballot box in November. And that's how we win. With that, I'll turn it back over to Adam Kinzinger.
All right. I see a few of you I knew from D.C. Hi, guys. Good, giving me flashbacks all of a sudden. We'll go ahead and take questions. If you have somebody specifically you want to direct it to, please mention that person. Otherwise, we'll kind of go around the horn with some of the questions. So, yes, sir. Yeah. And about it was Gabe Sterling that did his little press thing here where he's like, somebody's going to get killed. And that's where I'm sitting. I don't know if it was this staircase or another, but I'm like, yeah, this is bringing it back. Look, you guys in Georgia are the epicenter of this. I mean, January 6th, obviously, all the attention was on us at that moment because that was a very violent day. But the epicenter is here in these state houses. And I think, frankly, in November, that's going to be where there's a risk of violence. And there's a risk of something like we saw on January 6th, but at the state levels. And I would say this to every particularly swing state, be ready and be prepared. Because the forces of Donald Trump have already had a dry run. They were kind of inventing the plane as we went between the election day and January 6th. They've now thought through their plans. When they lose, how are they going to convince a state house or state representative to vote against how the people in their state voted? What are they going to, can they show up and occupy a state capitol? So standing here in the middle is very humbling to me because, like I said, you know, everything on TV is bigger than when you see it, right? You're here and you're like, all these historic moments, these bad historic moments happened right here. And it just reinforces to me and reminds me that, again, it's not necessarily members of Congress or U.S. senators that are going to be the bulwark to defend against illiberal forces. It's going to be the local election worker, right? It's going to be the state representative. It's going to be doing the right thing on the local and state level that's going to be the defense. So that's what I would say on that. It's a weird and humbling thing to stand here and see all that's happened around here. Yeah. Yeah, look, we haven't talked about specifics yet. This is all we've talked about is this process of endorsement. And look, I'd be willing to do whatever is necessary to help ensure that Joe Biden wins. But on top of that, to tell the Republicans, the 20%, we'll call them Haley voters for lack of a better term, the 78,000, I think, Republicans in Georgia that voted against Donald Trump, even though Nikki Haley was out of the race, to tell those people it's okay. We've become a country where our political stripes have become our identity. And it's really hard to shed your identity because that's everything you believe about yourself. But our identity has to be, as I believe it was you, one of you two said, our identity has to be Americans. It was you. It has to be that we are Americans who defend democracy. So whatever the campaign asking me, certainly I'd be open to doing it. I want to make sure that Republicans particularly understand you don't have to agree with everything Joe Biden says. You probably don't agree with everything Donald Trump says. And by the way, you probably don't agree with everything your spouse says. But this is about defending the greatest country in the world. My grandfather stared down the Nazis in World War II. He went in just after Normandy. He could never talk about his experiences. I remember once at the Thanksgiving dinner table, I tried to talk to him, and he just started crying. That's the extent of what I could get out of him. I think about what that generation and my grandfather and my generation in the post-9/11 wars has given, literally the ultimate sacrifice for this country. It is not much of a sacrifice for Republicans to say, I'll vote Democratic this year to defend the very same cause. So whatever role that takes, I'll take it because to me, I've said this and all you guys that follow politics, every 2 years it's the most important election of our lifetime. This actually is the most important election of our lifetime. By the way, she was one of my very first people to interview me when I was a candidate in 2009. You remember that? Okay, so I just thought I'd mention that. Look, I think, what does the campaign need to do? I think they're doing it. I've been very impressed that the Biden campaign has recognized that there are gettable Republicans out there, that it doesn't mean that Joe Biden has to become somebody he's not to get those Republicans, but it's about reaching out and saying this is a tent where when we're defending democracy, you're welcome, no matter what your political stripes are. I think he's done a good job in pushing back against Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I got to tell you, the 20% of Nikki Haley voters, they are all about Ukraine defeating Russia. They understand the importance of the post-World War II order. National defense means something to them. And they're also not buying Donald Trump when he says, I've kept us out of World War III. Well, when you surrender to your enemy and give them everything they want, you're probably not going to end up in a war because they don't have to shoot a shot to get what they need. Donald Trump stood next to Vladimir Putin and said, I trust him over our intelligence agencies. What do you think that did to Putin standing at home? What do you think that did to the FSB? It gave them a huge boost. So I think Joe Biden showing his commitment to strong national defense, showing his commitment to democracy, and showing, frankly, that you're welcome, even if you're still a Republican, is a huge thing. As far as anything else, we'll see how this goes on. Do you guys want to add to that?
This election is going to be determined by the 10% that sit and look like Adam and I, that are Republicans and conservative in nature, but just don't have the stomach to vote for somebody like Donald Trump. They just have enough moral character in themselves to not gravitate towards him and his life in the gutter. And so I think it's important for us to be able to convince that 10%, because they're going to do one of several things. They're either going to stay home and sit on the couch and not vote for either one, or they're going to show up and they're going to vote for Joe Biden. And I think the opportunity here is, as a Republican, that we plan to have our party back to where it works and functions and operates and negotiates with Democrats and works with compromise. But to get that back, it has to be to get rid of Donald Trump. We've got to get rid of him. And I think for now, the Biden administration, the Biden campaign is doing a good job of reaching out for individuals that look like us and talk like us and think like us and have campaigned as conservatives. But I think there's additional olive branches. I think in looking at how we talk about this economy, because this is all going to come down to the economy, being sensitive to be able to talk about both sides of the economy, which President Biden is doing. There's two sides. Some people wake up today and it's the worst economy they've ever faced. They can't afford rent or houses or groceries. Some are waking up in the greatest economy ever because their houses are worth more and their 401ks are worth more. So being sensitive to talk to both parts of that. And you're starting to see that messaging come out and abroad. The reality is this, Donald Trump can talk about all the spending and all the debt that Joe Biden has had on his almost 4 years of watch. Donald Trump spent $8 trillion we didn't have, right? He spent it because, and it wasn't just COVID related, he spent it because he was trying to buy off constituencies from coast to coast. And so Donald Trump shows up as a fake Republican. My job, Adam's job, and others that are trying to take on this mantle and give air cover to the millions of Republicans that don't want to vote for Donald Trump. They don't even want to like Donald Trump. And you said this the other night on TV, in 10 years, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Republican that even admits they voted for Donald Trump. Let me start with the consequences that I'm facing today they pale in comparison to the consequences of having Donald Trump as the president of this country for 4 more years. But certainly there's personal, there's professional, there's political consequences that come on. I showed up at this Capitol on a mission to put policy over politics, right? Many folks walk into this building and they have that as a North Star, and then as time goes on, they gravitate towards just being a political operative. For me, this is what I believe my country is calling on me to do, is set this Republican Party back in the right direction. And if that means I never run for political office again, that's great. That's okay. That's the job that I've spent doing in this period of time. But if it opens up a door in the future opportunities and the Republican Party gets back on its feet, absolutely, I'll look to run for office again.
I'll just say on I know it's hard to believe from politicians, but I have no plans for anything after this. And I love being on this side of elected office, just so you guys know. It's like, I don't have to go to D.C., and I don't have to operate in that environment that I've been seeing. It's crazier than when I was there. In terms of the consequences, look, it's just a little window into kind of the number of texts I expect to get today, right? Thankfully, we flushed a lot of that out of the system over the last couple of years. But I had my co-pilot from Iraq about 1.5 years ago that sent me a text, and he said, "I was ashamed to have ever flown with you." Now, let's think about that, okay? I fought with this guy in Iraq, and he woke up one day so angry that he sent me a text and said he was ashamed to have fought with me as a fellow American in a war. I don't say that to get your sympathy. I say that to say what kind of brain rot is infecting people, that they are destroying relationships, including those forged in combat, because of something they saw on TV or some anger how many families have been torn apart by Donald Trump? Everybody knows somebody, and maybe you're in that family too, where your parents can't talk to you or you can't talk to them because there's a different governing philosophy. This is madness, and this is what we're working to defeat. Bringing back decency, keeping decency, I guess I'll say, keeping decency in the Oval Office, and finally getting us to where we can disagree professionally, have big fights on the floor of the Georgia State House, right? But not hate each other. I'll just say real quick, it was inspiring for me watching these two backstage kind of talk about the old days and really get along, and I'm sure they were on opposite ends of a lot of pretty tough issues. But that's what this should be, and that's what we're here fighting for. So God bless you guys. Thank you. Hey, you can put me over here.